Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Victor Sinclair had built his life on two unshakable principles: loyalty and consequence. At 45, he carried himself with the measured precision of a man who'd spent 15 years in military intelligence before transitioning into private security consulting. His clients included Fortune 500 companies, foreign diplomats, and occasionally, people who needed problems to disappear quietly. The sprawling home in Westchester County reflected his success: 6 bedrooms, manicured grounds, and a security system that would make the Pentagon envious. But it was the basement office, soundproofed and lined with monitors, where Victor's true expertise resided. He understood surveillance, psychological pressure, and the delicate art of making people reveal their secrets. His wife Brooke had been 28 when they married 5 years ago, a stunning brunette with ambitious eyes who'd worked in public relations for a Manhattan firm. She'd pursued him relentlessly at a charity gala, claiming to be attracted to his mysterious intensity. Victor, 15 years her senior and recently divorced from a marriage that had crumbled under the weight of his military deployments, had been flattered by her attention. Brooke adapted quickly to the lifestyle his money provided. She quit her job within 6 months, claiming she wanted to focus on supporting his career and eventually starting a family. Victor had been content with the arrangement. He traveled frequently for work, and Brooke seemed happy managing their social calendar and redecorating their home with expensive taste. The first hairline crack appeared 18 months ago when Victor noticed subtle changes. Brooke's phone became permanently attached to her hand, face down on every surface. She developed new interests: yoga classes that ran unusually late, book clubs that never seemed to discuss actual books, and shopping trips that produced surprisingly few purchases for their duration. Victor's training had taught him to trust his instincts, and his instincts were screaming that something was wrong. But he'd also learned patience. Rushed actions led to sloppy results, and Victor Sinclair never produced sloppy results. So he watched. He noticed that Brooke's Wednesday yoga classes coincided with his regular client dinners in the city. He observed that her book club met exclusively when he was traveling for business. He cataloged the way she'd started showering immediately after returning from errands, and how she'd begun doing her own laundry instead of sending it to their regular service. 3 months of observation had given him a clear pattern. 3 more months of discreet investigation, using skills his former career had honed to perfection, had given him a name: Todd Brennan, 34, a personal trainer who owned a small gym in nearby Mount Kisco. But Victor didn't confront them. Instead, he began planning. The man who'd successfully orchestrated counterintelligence operations across 3 continents understood that the best revenge wasn't hot anger. It was cold, calculated, and absolutely devastating. Brooke and Todd thought they were having a secret affair. They had no idea they were walking into a trap that had been 2 years in the making. Victor's basement office now contained files on both of them that would rival FBI dossiers. Todd's financials, his ex-girlfriend's restraining order, his cocaine habit that he thought he'd hidden from everyone. Brooke's shopping addiction, her desperate desire to maintain appearances, her growing dependence on anxiety medication. But those were just the obvious pressure points. Victor had gone deeper, identifying their psychological vulnerabilities, their fears, their dreams. He knew that Todd still owed his ex-business partner $60,000 from a failed supplement company. He knew that Brooke had been secretly meeting with divorce attorneys, planning to take half of everything Victor had built. They thought they were playing a simple game of adultery. Victor was playing chess on a board they couldn't even see. The call would come soon. Victor had made sure of that. When it did, the final phase of his plan would begin, and Brooke and Todd would discover that some people should never be betrayed. Chapter 2. The Discovery. The actual moment of confirmation came on a Thursday evening when Victor returned unexpectedly from a supposedly week-long business trip to Chicago. He'd told Brooke his flight was delayed until Friday, then driven straight home instead of going to his hotel. He didn't enter through the front door. Instead, he used the service entrance through the garage, moving through his own home like the ghost he'd been trained to be. The sounds from upstairs told him everything he needed to know: Brooke's laughter, unfamiliar male voices, music playing louder than she ever allowed when he was home. Victor positioned himself in the hallway where the security camera couldn't detect him, and listened. Todd's voice was distinctive, deeper than Victor's, with a casual arrogance that suggested he felt completely comfortable in another man's home. But there was a second male voice, one Victor didn't recognize. "Told you this place was insane," the unknown voice was saying. "Your girl really landed herself a sugar daddy." "She's not my girl," Todd replied, his voice closer now, probably in the kitchen. "This is strictly business. Rich husband travels all the time. Lonely wife needs attention. Everybody gets what they want." Brooke's laughter followed. "Don't be such a romantic, Todd. Though I have to admit, having the whole place to ourselves is nice. Victor would lose his mind if he knew I was entertaining." "What's he gonna do? Hire someone to watch you?" The unknown voice again, followed by laughter from all three. Victor smiled in the darkness. If they only knew. He retreated to his basement office and reviewed the security footage from the past 3 hours. Todd had arrived at 7 p.m., followed 20 minutes later by another man. Victor's facial recognition software identified as Derek Hollis, 29, a bartender from Manhattan with a record of petty theft and assault charges. So it wasn't just an affair. Brooke was hosting parties in his home, treating his space like her personal playground. The disrespect was breathtaking in its audacity. Victor opened the file labeled Phase 2 on his computer. Inside were detailed psychological profiles, financial records, and a timeline that stretched 6 months into the future. Every phone call would be monitored, every movement tracked, every vulnerability exploited. But first, he needed to establish the rules of engagement. Victor made a single phone call to his old colleague Marcus Chun, who now ran a private security firm in Queens. "I need 3 men for a consultation job. Discreet, professional, tomorrow morning at 9. Then he drove to a hotel for the night, ensuring his alibi remained intact. The next morning, Victor returned home to find Brooke in the kitchen, wearing his favorite silk robe and looking perfectly innocent. She greeted him with a kiss that tasted like lies. "How was Chicago?" she asked, refilling his coffee cup. "Productive," Victor replied, studying her face for tells. The slight tension around her eyes, the way her fingers drummed against the counter. She was nervous but trying to hide it. "I may need to extend my next trip to Los Angeles. Could be gone for 10 days instead of 5. Brooke's relief was almost imperceptible, but Victor had spent years reading micro-expressions. "That's fine, honey. I'll keep myself busy." "I'm sure you will." That afternoon, while Brooke was at her book club, Marcus Chun and his team conducted a complete security audit of the house. They installed additional cameras, updated the alarm system, and placed monitoring devices that would track every phone call and internet search made on the property. Victor also had them install something special in the master bedroom, a device that would come into play much later when Brooke thought she was safest. By evening, Victor's home had become a surveillance center that would make the NSA jealous. Every room monitored, every entrance covered, every conversation recorded. Brooke had no idea she was now living in a cage. The final touch came that weekend. Victor announced he'd be traveling to Los Angeles the following week, then secretly arranged for private investigators to photograph Brooke and Todd together at 3 different locations. The images would be crucial for the next phase. But the photographs were just the beginning. Victor had also arranged for Todd's gym to face a surprise health department inspection, finding violations that would cost him thousands to correct. He'd arranged for Derek Hollis to be flagged in the system, ensuring his next traffic stop would result in a search that would find the cocaine Victor had anonymously tipped police about. These were warning shots, gentle pressure designed to create stress without revealing the source. Over the next month, Victor watched his targets begin to crack under the mounting pressure. Todd's business problems made him increasingly desperate for money. Derek's legal troubles made him paranoid and unreliable. Brooke, sensing the tension in her lover, began drinking more heavily and doubling her anxiety medication. They were weakening, exactly as Victor had planned. Soon, they would be ready for the final phase of his revenge. But first, he needed to introduce one more element to the game, something none of them would see coming. Chapter 3, The Setup. Victor's plan required a catalyst, someone who could serve as both witness and unwitting accomplice. He found her in Lily Morrison, a 22-year-old actress struggling to make ends meet in New York City. With her auburn hair and petite frame, she bore a passing resemblance to what a daughter of his and Brooke's might look like. Lily's background was perfect for Victor's needs. She was from Oregon, had no family in New York, and was desperately trying to pay for acting classes while working 3 part-time jobs. She was also exactly the type of vulnerable young woman that Brooke and Todd would either dismiss or try to exploit. Victor approached her through a legitimate casting call for a psychological thriller he claimed to be producing independently. The role, he explained, would require method acting. She'd need to spend several weeks in character, living as someone with a complex psychological background. The character has experienced significant trauma, Victor explained during their first meeting at a Manhattan coffee shop. She's been in and out of psychiatric facilities, struggles with identity issues, and has a complicated relationship with parental figures. Are you comfortable exploring that emotional territory? Lily's eyes lit up with the hunger Victor had expected. Absolutely. I've done Shakespeare, some experimental theater. I'm not afraid of psychological complexity. Excellent. The pay is $50,000 for 6 weeks of work, but you'll need to maintain the character even when not actively filming. Think of it as an extended method acting exercise. The money was enough to ensure Lily's complete commitment. Victor provided her with a detailed character background. Linda Chambers, a young woman who'd been in psychiatric care, who had vague memories of being separated from her family, who desperately wanted to reconnect with parents who might not even remember her. For 3 weeks, Victor worked with Lily to develop Linda's persona. He taught her specific mannerisms, coached her on the psychological patterns of someone who'd experienced institutional care, and provided her with enough background detail to convince any casual observer. Meanwhile, the pressure on his targets continued to mount. Todd's gym failed a second inspection, this time resulting in a temporary closure that cost him nearly $20,000. Derek was arrested again, this time on charges that would likely stick. Brooke, sensing her lover's increasing desperation, began talking about divorce more seriously. Victor knew from monitoring their conversations that Brooke had hired an attorney and was planning to file papers after his next business trip. She and Todd had discussed moving in together once she secured her settlement. They thought they were approaching their victory. Instead, they were walking into Victor's endgame. The call to Westchester Medical Center came on a Wednesday afternoon. Victor had cultivated the relationship with Dr. Helena Rodriguez, the psychiatric ward director, over several months. She believed she was consulting on a complex case involving a young woman with dissociative identity disorder, someone who'd been found wandering in Manhattan with no clear memory of her past. We've had her under observation for 48 hours, Dr. Rodriguez explained during their phone conversation. She's been asking for someone named Victor, claims he's her father. We finally found a match in our database. Victor expressed appropriate concern and confusion. I don't have a daughter, Dr. Rodriguez. There must be some mistake. That's what makes this case so interesting. She has very specific details about your address, your home, even describes rooms in ways that suggest she's been there. It's possible she's encountered you or your family in some context that created a false memory pattern. What do you recommend? We'd like you to come in, speak with her. Sometimes seeing the person helps clarify whether this is a genuine connection or a psychological construction. Either way, your cooperation could be crucial for her treatment. Victor agreed, of course. He also made sure the conversation was recorded and that Dr. Rodriguez understood he was coming purely as a good Samaritan, helping a confused young woman who'd somehow fixated on him. The stage was now set. Lily Morrison had become Linda Chambers so completely that she'd convinced trained psychiatric professionals. Brooke and Todd were planning their future with money they thought they'd steal from Victor. Derek was in custody, unable to interfere with what was coming. Victor had spent 2 years building this moment, when all the threads would come together in a confrontation that would destroy his enemies' lives completely. He made one final call before heading to the hospital. His attorney, William Foster, was someone who specialized in the kind of discreet legal problems that men like Victor occasionally faced. Bill, I'm going to need you on standby. There may be some complications in my personal life over the next week. Nothing criminal, but possibly messy. Understood. Same arrangement as before. Exactly. Full documentation, complete discretion, and whatever cleanup becomes necessary. Victor hung up and checked his appearance in the mirror. He looked like exactly what he was, a successful businessman concerned about a disturbing phone call. No one would suspect that he was about to orchestrate the complete destruction of 3 people who'd thought they could betray him. The drive to Westchester Medical Center took 23 minutes. When Victor arrived, he was greeted by Dr. Rodriguez, who led him through sterile corridors toward the psychiatric wing. I should warn you, she said as they walked. Linda has been quite insistent about your relationship. She may become emotional when she sees you. We'll need to observe how she reacts to determine if this is therapeutic or potentially harmful for her mental state. Of course, I just want to help if I can. They stopped outside a door marked Consultation Room B. Through the small window, Victor could see Lily Morrison, no, Linda Chambers now, sitting at a small table, wearing hospital scrubs and looking exactly like someone who'd been in psychiatric care. She'd done her job perfectly. Dr. Rodriguez opened the door and stepped inside. Linda, this is Victor Sinclair. You said you wanted to see him. Lily looked up, and for a moment, Victor almost believed the performance himself. Her eyes filled with tears. Her face showed a mixture of hope and confusion that seemed absolutely genuine. Daddy, she whispered. And in that moment, Victor's revenge began in earnest. Chapter 4, The Recognition. The word hit Victor like a physical blow, even though he'd been expecting it. Lily's performance was flawless. The trembling voice, the way she half rose from her chair before sitting back down, the tears that seemed to spring from genuine emotion rather than acting technique. I knew you'd come, she continued, her voice breaking. They said you wouldn't, but I knew you'd remember eventually. Dr. Rodriguez watched Victor's reaction carefully. His expression of shocked confusion was entirely genuine, not because he was surprised by Lily's words, but because her performance was so convincing that he almost questioned his own plan. I'm sorry, Victor said slowly, his voice carefully modulated to show concern rather than recognition. I think there's been some mistake. I don't have a daughter. Lily's face crumpled, but she didn't break character. Instead, she looked at Dr. Rodriguez with desperate eyes. He doesn't remember. They said this might happen. The doctors at the other place said the trauma might have affected his memory too. What other place? Dr. Rodriguez asked gently. Where they kept us both. After the accident. Lily's voice dropped to a whisper. Daddy, you were hurt so badly. They said you might not remember the time before. Victor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. Lily was improvising now, adding details they hadn't rehearsed. She was either a better actress than he'd realized, or she was genuinely disturbed by the role she was playing. Linda, Dr. Rodriguez said carefully, can you tell us about this accident? The car went into the water, Lily replied, her eyes fixed on Victor's face. Mommy was driving. I remember the cold and the darkness, and waking up in a place with white walls. They said Daddy was in a different facility, that he needed special treatment for his head injury. Victor's mouth went dry. He'd given Lily a background involving psychiatric care and family separation, but nothing about an accident or his own trauma. She was creating this narrative in real time, and it was disturbingly detailed. Mr. Sinclair, Dr. Rodriguez said, turning to him, have you ever experienced any head trauma? Any periods of memory loss? Victor's military medical records did show a concussion from an IED blast in Afghanistan, something he deliberately omitted from Lily's briefing. There was no way she could have known about that. Yes, actually. Military service. But that was 15 years ago, and I've never had memory issues. He paused, letting confusion creep into his voice. Are you saying this young woman believes she's my daughter from before my injury? It's a possibility we need to explore, Dr. Rodriguez replied. Linda, can you tell us anything else about your father? Details that might help us understand the connection you feel to Mr. Sinclair? Lily wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. He used to read me stories about a princess who lived in a tower, and he had a scar on his shoulder here. She gestured to a spot on her left shoulder blade. From when he was a soldier. Victor's blood turned to ice. He did have a scar in exactly that location, from shrapnel that had torn through his tactical vest. And when he was younger, much younger, he had read bedtime stories to his nephew about a princess in a tower, stories he'd invented to help the boy sleep after his parents died. But those details weren't in any file Lily could have accessed. He'd been extraordinarily careful about what information he'd provided her. Dr. Rodriguez, Victor said, his voice tight with an emotion that was no longer entirely acted. I need to speak with you privately. They stepped outside the consultation room, leaving Lily sitting at the table, staring at her hands with an expression of devastating loneliness. Doctor, I'm going to be completely honest with you, Victor said, his mind racing through possibilities. I was married before, briefly, when I was much younger. My wife died in a car accident. I was told there were no survivors. It was a complete lie, but it was the only explanation that made sense of what had just happened. Dr. Rodriguez nodded slowly. How old would your daughter have been at the time of the accident? If she existed? About 7. But I was never told about a child. The official report said my wife was alone in the car. Memory suppression is a documented response to severe trauma, both in adults and children, Dr. Rodriguez explained. It's possible that Linda's memories of you are real, but fragmented. And it's equally possible that your own traumatic response to losing your wife included blocking out memories of a child. Victor felt like he was falling down a rabbit hole of his own creation. Lily Morrison was supposed to be an actress playing a role, but the details she'd provided, details that resonated with his own carefully hidden past, suggested something far more complex. What happens now, he asked. We continue the evaluation. DNA testing would provide definitive answers about any biological relationship. In the meantime, I'd recommend that you both undergo psychological evaluation to explore these recovered memories. Victor nodded, his mind already calculating the implications. DNA testing would prove Lily wasn't his daughter, but the psychological evaluation might reveal things about his own past that he'd prefer to keep buried. Moreover, if word of this reached Brooke, it would complicate his revenge plan in ways he hadn't anticipated. They returned to the consultation room, where Lily was still sitting motionless. Linda, Dr. Rodriguez said gently, we're going to run some tests to help clarify your relationship with Mr. Sinclair. But I want you to know that regardless of the results, we're going to help you. Lily looked up at Victor with eyes that seemed to hold far too much pain for someone who was supposedly acting. You really don't remember me, do you, Daddy? Victor found himself genuinely at a loss for words. I'm sorry. I don't remember much from that time in my life. But I want to help you, regardless of what we discover. Would you stay with me tonight? I've been alone for so long. Dr. Rodriguez shook her head. Hospital policy doesn't allow overnight visitors in the psychiatric wing. But Mr. Sinclair could visit during regular hours while we work through this. I'll come back tomorrow, Victor promised, and was surprised to realize he meant it. As he drove home, Victor's mind churned through possibilities. Either Lily Morrison was a far better actress than he'd realized and had somehow researched details about his past that shouldn't have been accessible, or something much stranger was happening. But stranger still was his own reaction. For the first time in 2 years of planning, Victor felt uncertain about his next move. Lily's performance had been so convincing that he'd started to believe it himself, and that was dangerous. He had a revenge plan to execute, targets who needed to be destroyed, and a reputation for ruthless efficiency to maintain. He couldn't allow sentiment or confusion to derail what he'd spent 2 years building. But as he pulled into his driveway and saw Brooke's car absent, no doubt she was with Todd, celebrating their impending victory, Victor realized that his perfect plan had just developed its first unpredictable variable. And unpredictable variables had a way of changing everything. Chapter 5. The Complications. Victor entered his house to find it empty, which wasn't surprising. Brooke's Wednesday evening pattern was as predictable as clockwork: yoga class at 6, followed by dinner with Todd at whatever restaurant they thought was safe from observation. They'd be gone until after midnight. He went directly to his basement office and reviewed the day's surveillance footage. The morning had been routine. Brooke had made several phone calls to her divorce attorney, confirmed plans with Todd for the evening, and spent 40 minutes researching expensive properties in the Hamptons on his computer. But the afternoon footage was more interesting. Derek Hollis had been released on bail, and he'd come to the house at 2 p.m. The conversation between him and Brooke had been tense. Victor pulled up the audio recording and listened. Telling you, something's not right, Derek was saying. First, the cops find drugs in my car that I swear weren't there. Then Todd's business gets hit with all these violations. Now you're saying Victor got some weird call about a daughter. It's probably nothing, Brooke replied, but her voice carried an edge of anxiety. Rich guys get targeted by scam artists all the time. Someone probably researched him online and trained some girl to push his buttons. Or someone's watching us, Derek countered. Someone who knows enough about our situation to start applying pressure. You're being paranoid. Am I? Think about it, Brooke. Todd's gym gets shut down right when he needs money most. I get arrested for possession right when you need me to help move your stuff out. And now Victor gets pulled away by some emergency right when we're planning to make our move. Victor smiled grimly. Derek was smarter than he'd given him credit for. But intelligence without evidence was just paranoia. Even if someone is watching, Brooke said, what can they actually do? Victor travels constantly. He barely pays attention to what I do when he's home. And his prenup is ironclad. I get half of everything acquired during the marriage, regardless of fault. What if he files for divorce first? On what grounds? He'd have to prove adultery, and he's never around long enough to catch us. Besides, Todd and I have been careful. Victor laughed out loud in his empty basement. Careful. They'd been having sex in his bed, using his shower, eating his food, and planning their future with his money. Their definition of careful was adorably naive. But Derek's paranoia was a problem. If he convinced Brooke and Todd to alter their plans, it could disrupt Victor's timeline. He needed them to proceed exactly as they'd been planning, overconfident and predictable, which meant Derek needed to be removed from the equation permanently. Victor opened a secure communication app and sent a message to Marcus Chen. Need immediate consultation on the secondary target. Usual terms. The reply came within minutes. Understood. We'll handle tonight. Derek Hollis would be back in custody by morning, this time on charges that would keep him locked up for months. Victor had evidence of Derek's drug dealing, his involvement in several armed robberies, and his violation of the restraining order his ex-girlfriend had filed. All it took was an anonymous tip to the right detective, and Derek would disappear from Brooke and Todd's lives as if he'd never existed. But the Lily Morrison situation was more complex. Victor had spent the drive home analyzing her performance, trying to determine if she was still acting or if something else was happening. The details she provided about his scar and the princess stories bothered him most. Those weren't facts that could be researched online or obtained through casual investigation. They were intimate details from his past that he'd never shared with anyone. Victor opened his secure files and began reviewing everything he knew about Lily Morrison. Born in Portland, Oregon, to parents who died in a car accident when she was 15. Raised by her grandmother until 18, then moved to New York to pursue acting. No siblings, no extended family, no connections to his past that he could identify. But what if her background wasn't what it appeared to be? Victor's own expertise was in creating false identities and manipulating information. What if someone else was playing the same game, using Lily as a weapon against him? The possibility was troubling. Victor had made enemies during his military service, people who might want revenge decades later. But none of them should have known about his current situation with Brooke, and none of them would have reason to target him through such an elaborate psychological operation. Unless this wasn't about his military past at all. Unless someone had discovered his plan for revenge and was trying to turn it against him. Victor felt a familiar sensation, the hyper-awareness that came when a mission was compromised. Every instinct told him that he was no longer the only player in this game. His secure phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Enjoying your reunion with Linda? Some family connections run deeper than memory. A friend. Victor stared at the message, his mind racing through possibilities. Someone was watching him, someone who knew about the hospital visit, someone who understood the psychological pressure points that would affect him most. He traced the number, but it led to a prepaid phone purchased with cash at an electronics store in Manhattan. The security cameras at the store had been mysteriously malfunctioning that day. Professional work. Whoever was behind this understood operational security as well as Victor did. A second message arrived. Your wife's planning to file divorce papers Monday. Thought you should know. She's not the only one with friends watching. Victor deleted both messages and spent 20 minutes running counter-surveillance protocols on his own systems. Someone had been monitoring his communications, but they'd covered their tracks expertly. The intrusion was sophisticated enough to suggest military or intelligence training. By 11 p.m., Brooke still hadn't returned home. Victor checked her location through the tracking app on her phone. She was at Todd's apartment, no doubt celebrating their final preparations. Victor made a decision. Tomorrow he would return to the hospital and push Lily Morrison harder, determine once and for all whether she was an actress playing a role or something more dangerous. He would also accelerate his timeline for destroying Brooke and Todd. But tonight, he would set a trap for whoever was manipulating events from the shadows. Victor spent 2 hours modifying his security system, adding detection protocols designed to identify surveillance attempts. He also placed several false pieces of information in his digital files, details about his plans that were slightly incorrect. If someone was monitoring him, they would act on that false information revealing themselves. As he finished his preparations, Brooke's car pulled into the driveway. Victor watched through his monitors as she stumbled, slightly getting out of the car. She'd been drinking more than usual. She entered the house and went directly to their bedroom, where she showered and changed into pajamas before checking her phone one final time. Then she fell asleep with the kind of peaceful expression that belonged to someone who believed their problems were almost over. Victor remained in his basement office, reviewing footage and analyzing data until 3 a.m. Somewhere out there, an unknown enemy was playing a game that intersected with his own plans. By tomorrow night, he would know who they were and what they wanted. And then he would destroy them along with everyone else who had made the mistake of thinking they could manipulate Victor Sinclair. Chapter 6. The Truth Unveiled. Victor arrived at Westchester Medical Center the next morning with a briefcase containing DNA testing equipment and a voice stress analyzer disguised as a digital recorder. If Lily Morrison was acting, he would prove it. If she wasn't, he needed to understand what was really happening. Dr. Rodriguez met him in the lobby with an expression of professional concern. "Mr. Sinclair, I'm glad you're here. Linda had a difficult night. She's been experiencing what appear to be recovered memories. Very detailed, very traumatic. We've had to increase her sedation." "What kind of memories?" "The car accident she mentioned yesterday, but with much more detail. She's describing things that, well, they're quite specific. Water temperature, the sound of metal crushing, the sensation of being trapped. Either she's experienced severe trauma, or she's having psychotic episodes." They walked through the psychiatric ward toward Lily's room. Victor noticed increased security. 2 orderlies stationed in the hallway, cameras in every corner, and access cards required for every door. "Dr. Rodriguez, has anyone else shown interest in Linda's case? Contacted you about her?" She paused. "That's an interesting question. We did receive a call yesterday evening from someone claiming to be from the State Psychiatric Review Board. They wanted copies of Linda's files, but when I called the board to verify, they had no record of the request." Victor's jaw tightened. Someone was definitely working against him, and they were moving fast. "I'd like to suggest something," Victor said. "I brought equipment for DNA testing, and I'd also like to record our conversation today. If Linda truly believes I'm her father, the recording might help with her treatment. Of course, any additional data could be helpful." They entered the consultation room to find Lily sitting exactly where she'd been the day before, but her appearance had changed dramatically. Her eyes were red-rimmed and haunted, her hair unkempt, and her hands shook slightly as she looked up. "Daddy," she whispered, but this time the word carried a weight of desperation that made Victor's chest tighten. "Hello, Linda." Victor activated his hidden stress analyzer and set up the DNA testing kit. "Dr. Rodriguez tells me you've been remembering more about the accident." Lily nodded, her eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that was disturbing. "I remember everything now. The rain, Mommy crying because you two had been fighting. She was driving too fast, and when we hit the guardrail, the car flipped into the river." Victor's stress analyzer registered massive spikes in Lily's biometrics, heart rate, breathing, vocal stress. But the patterns were consistent with someone reliving genuine trauma, not someone fabricating a story. "What happened after the car went into the water?" Dr. Rodriguez asked gently. "It was so cold. I couldn't breathe. She wasn't moving anymore. But Daddy got me out. He pulled me through the window and swam to shore, but then he collapsed. There was blood in the water." "Linda," Victor said carefully, "I need you to be very specific. Can you describe the injury that caused the bleeding?" "Your head was cut, right here." She gestured to a spot above her left temple. "And there was something wrong with your arm. You kept trying to hold me, but your left arm wouldn't work right." Victor's breath caught. The head injury and nerve damage she was describing matched his actual military medical records exactly, details that were classified and should have been impossible for anyone to access. "Dr. Rodriguez," Victor said, his voice tight, "I need to speak with you privately again." Outside the room, Victor struggled to maintain his composure. "Doctor, I need to tell you something that I've never told anyone. My military medical records show injuries that match exactly what Linda just described. Head trauma and nerve damage to my left arm. But those injuries occurred in Afghanistan, not in any car accident." Dr. Rodriguez studied his face carefully. "Mr. Sinclair, is it possible that your memories of how you received those injuries are false?" That your mind created the military trauma story to block out something more devastating. No. I have documentation, photographs, witnesses. I was injured by an IED blast. I was never married before my current wife, and I've never had a daughter. Then how do you explain Linda's knowledge of those specific injuries? Victor had no explanation. Either Lily Morrison had access to classified military medical records, or something far stranger was happening. They returned to the consultation room, where Lily was staring out the window with an expression of profound sadness. "Linda," Victor said, sitting across from her, "I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer as honestly as you can." "Okay, Daddy. What's your full name?" "Linda Marie Sinclair. But the people at the other hospital called me Linda Morrison because they said my memory was confused." Victor's blood ran cold. He'd never told Lily that her character's name should be Linda Sinclair. He'd specifically instructed her to use Linda Chambers. "What other hospital?" "The one in Oregon. I was there for 15 years, Daddy. They said you were getting treatment somewhere else, that you couldn't take care of me because of your brain injury. They said when I got better, when I remembered things correctly, I could find you." Victor looked at Dr. Rodriguez, who was taking notes with increasing intensity. "Linda, who told you to come to New York? Who gave you my address?" "Dr. Patterson at the Oregon hospital. He said my memories were getting clearer, that it was time to reconnect with my father. He gave me money for the trip and told me where to find you." "Do you remember Dr. Patterson's first name?" "William. Dr. William Patterson. He was nice to me, but he always seemed sad when he talked about you. He said you'd been through terrible things and might not remember me at first." Victor's hands were shaking now. Dr. William Patterson had been his commanding officer in Afghanistan, the man who'd pulled him out of the wreckage after the IED blast. Patterson had died in a helicopter crash 3 years ago. "Dr. Rodriguez," Victor said, his voice barely controlled, "I need to make some phone calls." Immediately. In the hallway, Victor called his former military intelligence contact, Colonel Sarah Hayes, using a secure line. "Sarah, I need you to run a complete background check on Linda Morrison, also Linda Sinclair, age 22, originally from Oregon. And I need you to check if Dr. William Patterson had any connection to psychiatric facilities in the Pacific Northwest before his death." "Victor, what's this about?" "You sound. Just run the checks." "And Sarah? Use maximum security clearance. I think someone's been playing games with classified information." The results came back within an hour. There was no record of Linda Morrison ever existing. No birth certificate, no school records, no social security number. But there was a record of Linda Marie Sinclair, age 22, who had been a patient at the Henderson Psychiatric Institute in Oregon for 15 years. According to the files, Linda Sinclair was the daughter of Captain Victor Sinclair and Elena Sinclair, who had died in a car accident when Linda was 7. The father, according to the records, had been transferred to a military psychiatric facility for treatment of severe PTSD and memory loss following the accident. But none of it was true. Victor had never been married to anyone named Elena, had never had a daughter, had never been in a car accident. Someone had created an entire false history, complete with military records, psychiatric files, and a living person who believed every detail. The final piece came in a call from Sarah Hayes. "Victor, I found something. Dr. Patterson did work with psychiatric facilities before he died. He was part of a classified program called Project Mindbridge, psychological warfare research. The program was designed to create sleeper assets using memory implantation and identity manipulation." Victor felt the ground shift beneath his feet. "Are you saying Linda is a sleeper agent?" "I'm saying someone used experimental psychology to create a person who genuinely believes she's your daughter, complete with detailed memories that mesh with your actual history. The question is who has access to that technology and why they're using it against you." Victor hung up and returned to the consultation room, where Lily was waiting with the same patient expression she'd worn for 2 days. But now he understood that she wasn't acting at all. She genuinely believed she was his daughter because someone had programmed her to believe it. Someone who knew his real history, his military service, his current situation with Brooke. Someone who was using psychological warfare against him with the same ruthless precision he'd planned to use against his wife and her lover. "Linda," he said gently, "I believe you, and I'm going to help you remember everything. But first, he was going to find whoever had created her and destroy them." Chapter 7. The Hunter Becomes Hunted. Victor spent the drive home analyzing the implications of what he'd discovered. Someone with access to classified military psychological warfare technology had created Lily Morrison, Linda Sinclair, as a weapon against him. The sophistication required was staggering. False military records, fabricated psychiatric histories, and memory implantation so detailed that the subject genuinely believed her manufactured past. This wasn't amateur manipulation. This was professional psychological warfare at the highest level. The question was why. Victor had made enemies during his military service, but Project Mindbridge would have been classified beyond most people's access. Someone with serious intelligence connections was targeting him, and they'd been planning this for months or years. Victor's secure phone buzzed as he pulled into his driveway. Another untraceable number. Enjoying your family reunion? Phase 1 complete. Phase 2 begins tonight. Check your basement office. Victor's blood ran cold. Someone had been inside his house, inside his most secure space. He entered through the front door, moving with the cautious precision his training had taught him. The house appeared normal. Brooke's purse on the kitchen counter, her laptop open on the dining room table, the faint scent of her perfume in the air. But as Victor descended to his basement office, he knew immediately that someone had been there. Nothing was obviously displaced, but the subtle signs were unmistakable to someone trained in surveillance. A chair positioned slightly differently, papers stacked in an order he never used, his computer monitor angled a few degrees off its normal position. On his desk was a single manila folder that hadn't been there that morning. Inside was a photograph of Brooke and Todd together at his gym, and beneath it, a handwritten note in familiar writing. Some betrayals run deeper than marriage. Some revenge takes longer to plan. Phase 2. Let the games begin. Elena. Victor stared at the signature, his mind reeling. Elena. The name from Linda's false memories, the fictional wife who had supposedly died in a car accident with their fictional daughter. But the handwriting wasn't fictional. Victor recognized it, even though he hadn't seen it in nearly 20 years. Elena Vasquez had been a fellow intelligence officer in Afghanistan, someone he'd worked with on several classified operations. More than that, they'd been lovers for 6 months, until she'd been reassigned to a different unit. Victor had thought he loved her, but military relationships were complicated, and they'd drifted apart after her transfer. Elena had been reported killed in action 2 years later, during a mission in Syria that had gone wrong. Victor had attended the memorial service, had grieved for what might have been. But if Elena was alive, if she'd been operating under deep cover for 15 years, then everything Victor thought he knew about his past was wrong. His secure phone rang. This time, when he answered, he heard a voice he'd thought was silenced forever. Hello, Victor. Surprised? Elena. Her name came out as barely a whisper. You're supposed to be dead. Death was greatly exaggerated. Necessary for the mission, but temporary. I've been watching you for a very long time, mi amor. Watching you build your little life. Watching you plan your little revenge against your cheating wife. Why now? Why this elaborate game with Linda? Elena's laugh was warm and familiar, carrying echoes of desert nights and shared secrets. Because you fascinated me back then, and you fascinate me now. The way your mind works, the precision of your planning, the ruthlessness you hide behind that respectable facade. I wanted to see how you'd handle a psychological operation directed against you. You used an innocent girl as a weapon. Innocent. Victor, Linda isn't some random actress I recruited. She's my daughter. Our daughter. The words hit Victor like a physical blow. That's impossible. We were never married? No. But we were together, and I was pregnant when I got reassigned. I never told you because I knew it would compromise both our careers. After the mission in Syria went bad and I officially died, I gave birth to Linda in a safe house in Romania. She's been with me ever since. Victor's legs gave out, and he collapsed into his desk chair. Linda is really my daughter? Biologically, yes. But I had her memories adjusted when she was young, gave her a different father, a different history. It was safer that way, simpler. She grew up thinking her father was a businessman who died when she was little. Then how does she remember details about my military injuries? Things that happened before she was born. Because 3 months ago, I had her memories adjusted again. The false ones removed, the real ones restored, plus some additional details from your classified files. I wanted her to find you naturally, to be genuinely confused about her identity. The performance you saw at the hospital wasn't acting, Victor. It was a young woman whose entire reality had been rewritten, desperately trying to understand who she really was. Victor felt sick. You tortured our daughter to get to me. I prepared her for the truth. There's a difference. Linda is strong. She inherited that from both of us. She'll recover from the temporary confusion once she understands the full picture. What do you want, Elena? What I've always wanted. You. But not the domesticated version you've become, playing house with some gold-digging slut. I want the Victor the First new in Afghanistan. Sharp, dangerous, uncompromising. The man who could eliminate 3 enemy operatives with a dinner fork and plan a psychological warfare operation that would make the CIA jealous. Victor's mind was racing, trying to process the implications. You've been watching me plan my revenge against Brooke. Every detail. Your surveillance, your psychological pressure campaigns, your timeline for destroying her and her lover. It's been beautiful to watch, Victor. Elegant and ruthless. But small scale. I have something bigger in mind. Such as, Todd Brennan isn't just some personal trainer having an affair with your wife. He's a former intelligence operative who went dark 3 years ago. He's been using his relationship with Brooke to access your client files, selling information about your security consulting work to foreign interests. Victor felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. You're saying Todd targeted Brooke specifically to get to me. Todd's real name is Thomas Kozlov. He's Russian intelligence, part of a long-term operation to compromise American security contractors. Your wife isn't cheating on you for love or money, Victor. She's been recruited as an asset. The implications were staggering. If Brooke was working with foreign intelligence, it meant Victor's entire client base was compromised. His security protocols, his methods, his contacts, everything he'd built could be in enemy hands. Why are you telling me this? Because I need your help to stop them. And because you deserve to know that your plan for personal revenge has walked into the middle of a much larger game. Todd and Brooke aren't just stealing from your marriage, Victor. They're stealing from your country. Victor stood and walked to his wall safe, retrieving a pistol and checking its load. Where are they now? Together at Todd's apartment, uploading the last of your client files to a secure server. They're planning to disappear tonight, after Brooke files the divorce papers tomorrow morning. By the time you realize what's happened, they'll be in Moscow with enough intelligence to compromise every client you've ever protected. And you want me to stop them? I want us to stop them. Together. Like we should have been all along. Victor stared at the photograph of Brooke and Todd, feeling the familiar cold focus that came before combat operations. His personal revenge had been complicated by larger stakes, but the core mission remained the same. Eliminate the threats to everything he'd built. What did you have in mind? Elena's voice carried a smile he could almost see. Something that will remind you why we worked so well together in Afghanistan. Something final and absolute. I'm listening. Todd's apartment building has a gas leak that's been reported to the city, but not yet repaired. Such a tragedy when these old buildings have accidents. Especially when foreign operatives are careless with their cigarettes. Victor felt a familiar rush. The combination of righteous purpose and lethal capability that had made him so effective in the field. Elena was right. He'd been thinking too small, planning elaborate psychological revenge when the situation called for direct action. What about Linda? She's safe at the hospital for now. After tonight, we'll bring her home and help her adjust to the truth about her parentage. She'll understand that everything we did was necessary. Victor looked around his basement office. The monitors showing empty rooms, the files documenting a marriage that had been a lie from the beginning, the evidence of betrayal that went far deeper than adultery. Elena, after we handle Todd and Brooke, what happens between us? That depends on whether you remember who you really are, Victor. The man I fell in love with in Afghanistan wouldn't hesitate for a second. The question is whether that man still exists. Victor smiled for the first time in days, feeling something cold and deadly settling back into place in his chest. He never left. He was just waiting for the right mission. Then let's go to work. Chapter 8. The Final Operation. Victor met Elena at a parking garage in Mount Kisco, 3 blocks from Todd's apartment building. She emerged from a black sedan looking exactly as he remembered her from 20 years ago. Dark hair pulled back severely, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, and the kind of controlled grace that came from years of combat training. You haven't aged a day, Victor said as she approached. Clean living and good genetics, Elena replied, but there was something guarded in her expression. Victor, before we proceed, I need you to understand something. What we're about to do, there's no going back. Once Todd and Brooke are eliminated, your old life ends completely. Good. My old life was built on lies. Elena studied his face in the dim garage lighting. And Linda? Are you prepared to be a father to a daughter you've never raised? A girl whose entire reality we've manipulated for operational purposes? Victor had been thinking about that question during the drive. The idea of having a daughter was overwhelming. But the alternative, leaving her in the psychiatric system, confused and alone, was unacceptable. We'll figure it out, he said. After tonight. Elena nodded and opened her trunk, revealing an array of equipment that looked like it had been assembled for a military operation. Surveillance gear, communications equipment, and several items Victor recognized as incendiary devices. Todd's building has 12 units, Elena explained, spreading a blueprint across the trunk lid. He's in 4B, corner apartment with 2 exits. The gas leak is real. Building management has been ignoring it for weeks. All we need to do is create an ignition source. What about collateral damage? Other residents. Building's been evacuated for a city inspection that was mysteriously scheduled for tonight. Amazing how easy it is to manipulate bureaucratic systems when you know the right pressure points. Victor examined the blueprint, noting escape routes and sight lines. Brooke's car isn't in the parking lot. How do we know they're both inside? Elena showed him a tablet displaying live surveillance footage from inside Todd's apartment. Through what appeared to be a hidden camera, Victor could see Brooke and Todd at a computer, uploading files to an external drive. How long have you been watching them? 3 months. I needed to confirm that Todd was really Russian intelligence before involving you. Your government takes a dim view of assassinating personal trainers, but enemy operatives are fair game. Victor watched Brooke's face on the screen as she copied his client files. There was no emotion there, no guilt or hesitation. She was working with the focused efficiency of a professional operator. Was any of it real? He asked. Our marriage, her feelings, anything? Todd recruited her 18 months after your wedding, Elena said gently. Before that, she was exactly what she appeared to be, a gold digger who married you for money. The foreign intelligence angle came later. So she betrayed me twice. Once for money, once for ideology. Some people are natural traitors, Victor. It's a character flaw that makes them useful to people like us. Elena handed him an earpiece and a small device that looked like a garage door opener. Detonator, she explained. We wait until they're both confirmed inside, then trigger the gas explosion. It'll look like an accident, faulty appliance, poor building maintenance, tragic accident. Victor attached the earpiece and tested the communication system. Elena's voice came through clearly. Can you hear me? Affirmative. Good. I'll take position across the street, maintain overwatch, and confirm no unexpected visitors. You approach from the rear, place the incendiary device, and trigger on my signal. Victor nodded, feeling the familiar calm that came before lethal operations. This was what he'd been trained for, what he'd done dozens of times in Afghanistan. The fact that one of the targets was his wife made it personal, but it didn't change the tactical requirements. They synchronized their watches and moved into position. Victor approached Todd's building through the rear alley, noting the strong smell of gas that had been leaking from the basement utility room. Elena had been right. The building was a disaster waiting to happen. The rear entrance was secured with a standard lock that took Victor less than 30 seconds to bypass. He moved through the building's back corridors, following the blueprint Elena had provided, until he reached the utility room adjacent to Todd's apartment. The incendiary device was simple but effective, a delayed ignition system that would create a spark in the gas-filled space approximately 90 seconds after activation. More than enough time for Victor to reach a safe distance. Package placed, he whispered into his microphone. Confirmed. Both targets still inside apartment. Preparing to trigger in 60 seconds. Victor moved back through the building and exited through the rear, positioning himself behind a dumpster 50 yards away with a clear view of Todd's apartment windows. Victor, Elena's voice came through his earpiece. Before we proceed, I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. Everything I've done, the fake death, the years of separation, even the manipulation with Linda, it was all to bring us back together. Elena, I know this isn't the time, but I needed to say it. In 30 seconds, we'll both be murderers. I wanted you to know why. Victor watched the apartment window, where he could see shadows moving behind the curtains. Brooke and Todd, continuing their betrayal, unaware that their lives were about to end. 10 seconds, Elena announced. Victor's finger hovered over the detonator. 20 years of professional training told him to complete the mission. These were enemy operatives who'd compromised national security and betrayed the man they'd claimed to love. But something else stopped him, a realization that had been building since he'd first heard Linda's voice calling him Daddy. Elena, abort the mission. What? Victor, we can't. I said abort. I'm not triggering the device. Silence on the radio for several seconds. Then, Victor, what's wrong? They're right there. We can end this. We can end it differently. Victor stood and walked away from the building, leaving the incendiary device in place, but armed. Elena, I spent 2 years planning my own revenge against Brooke and Todd. Elaborate psychological torture, financial ruin, public humiliation. I was going to destroy them slowly and completely. So what changed? I realized that the kind of man who plans that level of revenge isn't the kind of man who should be raising a daughter. Linda's been through enough manipulation and trauma. She needs a father who can choose forgiveness over vengeance. Victor, they're foreign agents. They've compromised your clients, stolen classified information. Then we'll handle it legally. I'll contact the FBI, provide evidence, let the justice system work. But I won't become a killer in front of my daughter's window. Another long silence. Then Elena's voice, colder now. I misjudged you, Victor. The man I knew in Afghanistan wouldn't have hesitated. The man you knew in Afghanistan didn't have a daughter to think about. Victor was walking toward his car when the explosion lit up the night sky behind him. The blast was enormous, shattering windows for 3 blocks and sending a fireball into the night sky. He spun around, staring in horror at the inferno that had been Todd's building. Elena, what did you do? I completed the mission. Her voice came through the earpiece, now crackling with static from the electromagnetic pulse. Some betrayals require blood, Victor. I thought you understood that. Victor ran toward the burning building, but the heat was too intense to approach. Fire trucks were already approaching in the distance, but there was no way anyone inside that building had survived. Brooke and Todd were dead. Elena had killed them both, while Victor thought he was choosing mercy. Elena, he shouted into his microphone, but there was no response. She was gone, vanished into the night the way she'd been trained to do. Victor stood in the street, watching his wife's funeral pyre burn against the night sky, and realized that his choices had led to this moment as surely as if he'd triggered the device himself. He'd thought he was choosing forgiveness, but Elena had been right about one thing. Some betrayals could only be answered with blood. The question now was what kind of man he would be when he walked into that hospital tomorrow to claim his daughter. Chapter 9. The Price of Truth. Victor sat in his car outside Westchester Medical Center as the sun rose over the parking lot, watching news coverage of the explosion on his phone. The official story was exactly what Elena had planned. Gas leak, tragic accident, 2 victims identified as Brooke Sinclair and Thomas Brennan. The FBI would eventually discover Todd's real identity and his intelligence connections, but by then the narrative would be set. A random accident, not an assassination. Victor had spent the night reviewing everything he knew about Elena's return from the dead, her manipulation of Linda's memories, and her orchestration of last night's murders. The woman he'd once loved had become something far more dangerous than he'd imagined, someone willing to kill without hesitation and manipulate their own daughter as a weapon. But the most disturbing realization was that Elena had been right about one thing. Victor had been planning his own form of psychological murder against Brooke and Todd. The only difference between his plan and Elena's was the method, not the ultimate goal of destruction. Dr. Rodriguez met him in the hospital lobby with an expression of professional sympathy. Mr. Sinclair, I heard about the terrible accident last night. I'm so sorry for your loss. Thank you, Victor replied, though he wasn't sure what emotion he was supposed to be feeling. Relief that Brooke's betrayal was over? Guilt that he'd been planning his own revenge? Anger that Elena had forced his hand? How is Linda this morning? Much better, actually. She's been asking for you constantly. The memories seem to be stabilizing. She's no longer experiencing the confusion and fragmentation we saw yesterday. They walked through the psychiatric ward toward Linda's room. Victor dreaded the conversation ahead, knowing he would have to lie to his daughter about her mother's actions and his own role in last night's events. Linda was sitting by the window when they entered, looking more composed than she had since Victor first met her. When she saw him, her face lit up with genuine joy. "Daddy, Dr. Rodriguez said I can go home today if you're ready to take me." Victor felt something break apart in his chest. The word home implied a life together that he wasn't sure he knew how to build. "Linda, we need to talk about some things first. About your mother, about what happens next." "I know," she said quietly. "Dr. Rodriguez told me about Mommy dying in the explosion. I'm sad, but I'm not surprised. She always lived dangerously." Victor exchanged glances with Dr. Rodriguez. "What do you mean by that?" "She was always traveling, always involved in things she couldn't talk about. I knew she wasn't really a travel agent like she told people. And when she decided to have my memories changed, she explained that it was for my safety, that there were people who might hurt me if they knew who my father really was." "Linda, your mother told you that I was your father?" 3 months ago, yes. She said it was time for me to know the truth, that I was old enough to handle it. She told me you were a security specialist who'd worked for the government, that you were brave and good, but also dangerous when you needed to be." Victor sat down across from her, trying to process this new information. "Did she tell you why she faked her death all those years ago?" "She said it was a mission that went wrong, but that she couldn't come home because it would put both of us in danger. She's been watching over us from a distance, making sure we were safe." Dr. Rodriguez cleared her throat. "Mr. Sinclair, I'll give you some privacy to talk. But Linda, remember what we discussed about processing traumatic information slowly?" After the doctor left, Victor studied his daughter's face, looking for signs of the psychological manipulation Elena had described. But Linda seemed remarkably stable for someone whose entire reality had been rewritten twice. "Linda, how do you feel about discovering that your memories were changed?" "Confused at first, but then relieved. I always felt like something was missing, like there were pieces of my life that didn't fit together. When the real memories came back, everything made sense." "And you're not angry at your mother for lying to you?" Linda considered this carefully. "I think she did what she thought was best to protect me. But I'm glad I found you, Daddy. I've been alone for so long." Victor felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. This young woman was his daughter, created by a brief relationship 20 years ago, shaped by lies and manipulation, but ultimately innocent of the games adults had played around her. "Linda, if you come home with me, things will be complicated. Your mother's death means you have no other family except me, and I've never been a father before. I don't know if I'll be good at it. We'll figure it out together," she said with a smile that reminded Victor of Elena at her best, confident, optimistic, unafraid of challenges. Over the next 2 hours, Dr. Rodriguez explained the discharge process and provided Victor with contacts for therapists who specialized in recovered memory cases. Linda would need ongoing psychological support as she adjusted to her restored identity, but her prognosis was good. As they walked to the hospital parking lot, Linda carrying a small bag of personal items, Victor's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Taking good care of our daughter, I see. Remember, she's all you have left of me now. Don't waste the opportunity." Victor deleted the message without responding. Elena was still watching, still manipulating events from a distance. But she'd made a crucial error. She'd given him something more important than revenge or justice. She'd given him a daughter. "Daddy," Linda asked as they reached his car. "What happens now?" Victor looked at this young woman who shared his blood but not his history, who'd been shaped by lies but somehow remained genuine, who'd lost her mother but gained a father in the same terrible night. "Now we go home," he said, "and we start over." As they drove away from the hospital, Victor made a silent promise. He would protect Linda from Elena's continued manipulations, from the truth about last night's murders, and from the darkness that had shaped his own life for too long. The man who'd spent 2 years planning elaborate revenge was dead, burned up in the same explosion that had killed his enemies. In his place was someone new, a father who would choose his daughter's future over his own past. It wasn't the ending Victor had planned, but as he listened to Linda talk excitedly about seeing her new home, he realized it might be the ending he deserved. The game was over. Elena had won, Brooke and Todd were dead, and Victor had a daughter to raise. Some victories, he was learning, felt remarkably like defeats. But some defeats opened doors to possibilities that revenge could never provide. Victor Sinclair, the ruthless intelligence operative, was finished. Victor Sinclair, the father, was just beginning. Epilogue. 6 months later, Victor stood in his renovated basement, which was no longer a surveillance center, but Linda's art studio. She'd discovered a talent for painting during her therapy sessions, and her canvases filled the room with color and life. The official investigation into the apartment explosion had concluded exactly as Elena had planned: accidental death due to negligent building maintenance. Brooke's estate had been settled, her betrayals never discovered by the authorities. Victor had quietly contacted the FBI about Todd's intelligence connections, providing enough anonymous evidence to trigger a counterintelligence investigation. Several other Russian assets had been identified and neutralized as a result. Elena remained a ghost, occasionally sending untraceable messages that Victor no longer answered. She was alive somewhere, probably running new operations, playing new games. But she'd gotten what she wanted. Victor had changed from the man she'd known in Afghanistan into someone who could choose family over vengeance. Linda was thriving. She'd enrolled in college, made friends, and slowly built a life that belonged entirely to her. The manufactured memories had been integrated with her real history through months of therapy, and she'd emerged stronger than anyone had expected. She still called him Daddy, and Victor had learned to love the sound of it. "Dad," Linda called from upstairs. "Dinner's ready." Victor smiled and headed toward the kitchen, leaving behind the basement where he'd once planned destruction and moving toward a future built on hope instead of revenge. Some battles, he'd learned, were won by laying down weapons rather than picking them up. And some families were forged in fire, but tempered by the choice to love instead of hate. Victor Sinclair had finally found a mission worth completing, being the father his daughter deserved. The man who never forgave anyone had learned to forgive himself.